So going to, it's not a set it and forget it. And for folks listening, this is not about protecting or policies or designing, none of those words, but, the shaping conditions, I think is what you've called. And what can you do no matter what your role is, right? It's 2 weeks on the job. You're a senior executive. You're a team lead with a group of 6 people, like whatever it may be. What are some of the things that you can do or can think about and how you show up in those places or help create those conditions or reinforce those conditions. And when we were chatting about this before, we kind of came down to like 5 drivers. Yeah. Let's call them that. Let's see how my memory goes. There's a piece around leadership. Mm-hmm. There's a piece around structure. There's a piece around values and rituals.
Yep.
There's a piece around metrics. And I think most importantly, what makes it work? People.
Yeah.
Right. So I think for folks listening, like think about how you can engage in those. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of them. Because when I do think they're like a good 5 areas to think about.
Yeah. And they are the 5 areas where you can shape conditions or kind of, how you keep a culture alive or things that impact your culture. So the first one you mentioned is leadership. And I do think kind of there's a bit of a paradox in there or a myth that it is solely driven by leadership, which I personally don't believe. But I do think leadership still plays a big role in kind of what you reward, what you recognize, how you communicate, but also the things that you ignore are signs to people of what you value. Mm-hmm. And they are, whether you want it or not, they are impacting your culture. Mm-hmm. So I've been in an organization where we had a group of team leads and one was significantly underperforming. And I that's not even the right word for it, but it was clearly someone who was just not in the right seat. They had wonderful talents and skill sets, but just not the ones that were needed for that role.
They couldn't thrive.
They couldn't thrive. And as a result of it, their team was not thriving, right? They were staying behind and kind of that just trickled down to everyone around this person. And I think we as senior leadership waited way too long with taking action on that. Not realizing enough what an impact it had on all the people around it and what it was kind of signaling of like, well, if he can do that, everyone can do it. We clearly don't value having the right people in the right seats. And as soon as action was taken and the person moved on to another role, new team lead stepped in, that team was thriving. So like individual talents kept kind of showed up from like very unexpectedly, right? So
very cool.
That was a really good learning in if you signal something like that, sometimes not doing anything is worse than taking the harder decision or harder path. So I think we already said 70% of culture is shaped by your direct kind of managers and peers. And the other component, and I think it is as much leadership as other people in the organization, but the power of storytelling. I read another HBR article on it, how in driving cultural change, they did research and kind of where that successfully happened, and what the key piece that made the difference was not starting with a workshop to discuss our values or changing our HR policies. It was in all cases the stories that were told. And it had to be stories or kind of what the stories shared in how they were told is they were authentic. They were about the people who told the story. So they were kind of authentic and about themselves. Theatrical in a way. So like enough for people to kind of engage with and really kind of buy into. So combining heart and mind and empowering. So it was showing behavior of a culture that was desired and against kind of the current cultural norms, but celebrated in a way and showing others like you can do this too.
Yeah.
Right. It's showing the path.
Yeah. It wasn't a department that I was in, but like a department that worked very closely with us. They did at the beginning of every Friday's team meeting, kudos.
Oh,
So
yeah.
everybody
Yeah, I love
wrote it
that.
down, put in a hat, and it's quite simple, right? And they all stood up from their desk, stood in a circle. And that was that example of storytelling, right? They were a
Yep.
sales team
Yep.
that were just giving her all the time. They did not have easy jobs by any means. And I thought it was great of that director to just create that moment that the stories weren't coming from her. It was the greater team of 20 of them sharing stories, which I thought was pretty cool.
Which is also a ritual,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That, which is a great example of totally a ritual and bringing those storytelling in. And, other values and rituals to me are kind of like the ways of working, right? Like
Yeah.
these habits that start to form. And yes, they're in professional settings, but I think a lot of people think of rituals or traditions in family settings, friendships, those things that bring a group together, right? And one that a kind of icebreaker or warm up activity we like to do in some of our sessions with folks is you're all sitting down at a big holiday dinner, depending on whatever the time of year is. We pick a big holiday. With Thanksgiving Canada just passed and coming up in the US. Let's say it's Thanksgiving dinner. We're all sitting down. What would be the dish that you would bring, right? So there's
yeah.
that sentiment that comes. So I think it's like interesting on how rituals just outside of work also like to give some context for that. But I do think they're the ways of working and the glue that holds people together. And, I've heard of, sharing your failure moments, like your F up moments, whatever you want to call them. Our team at the beginning of each of our team meetings, it's not only complicated, but we went, what's one thing that worked this weekend or week? Not weekend. What's one thing that worked this week and one thing that didn't? And what is your best news of the week, right? Yeah. And it's just interesting sharing those learnings and building that connection and super simple to do. But I think paired with that is like we can't underestimate the structure side of things, right? Yep. So when you have your vision, your purpose, how you set up and organize yourselves is also very, very important. And I mentioned organizations in silos, like when they're in silos, it's so important that you're like, okay, why are they in silos? And then is that contributing to like these pain points and these friction points and these rubs that they have? So I think it's really important to make sure that your culture and your structure are in sync with one another. Because if you have a structure, it may not reinforce your values and your culture and vice versa. So I think that's important to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you value collaboration or want to create a culture where people collaborate and you then structure your organization in a way that there's no incentive or value for one silo to work
or
with another.
It's not easy to do it.
It's not going to work.
No.
Right. I think people is another one that you mentioned. Obviously, I mean, we should have started with it. I do believe people both carry and create the culture. There's something around aligning the people that you hire and the people kind of that you try to make loyal to your organization. Who are they? And I do think there is this point of like coherence versus openness and making sure that it doesn't become too rigid and exclusive. So at least if that is what you value kind of in diverse thinking, maybe I assumed that everyone thinks that's important. But the people really carry and create culture. Yeah. That's ultimately kind of where it's formed.
Totally.
And then metrics matter too. And we talked about it in our recovery episode a lot. What you measure is what matters, and what you don't measure doesn't get attention. So if you really value kind of wellness, having an equal voice, how are you kind of incentivizing that, encouraging that, measuring it, having it show up in ways that people see that it is valued?
Yeah. And in Jay Galbraith's STAR model, like one of the last steps is rewards specifically for that. What you reward will continue, right? And you said it earlier, it's also what you don't reward. And people pick it up. Yeah. They're like, okay, I'm doing all this and no one's noticing it, so I'm not going to do it anymore. And then you stop and they're like, wait a second, where did that go? Like, so it's interesting to think about what are you subconsciously or consciously measuring, rewarding, not measuring, not rewarding. But, in bringing this all together, I don't want people to leave being like, okay, as the team lead, I've got to do these 5 drivers and I got to think this, coherence, openness, like it's a lot, right?
Yeah.
But I think on that people piece, there's a lot of, and our colleague Carlton at True Blue Inclusion says this to me all the time, and I think it's fabulous, is there is ownership and authorship.
Yeah.
So there is that co-authorship. And if you're someone that likes to take charge of some situations and like to know what's going on, just like let people be and see what naturally starts to evolve a little bit and what they will start to co-author together. And there will be friction. I think of culture as, especially in growing teams or with lots of external factors, as an elastic band. It's going to feel like it's going to stretch, but if it's strong enough, it will never snap. You just got to let it stretch and it'll just grow and you got to go with it. Right. So also don't think like, oh, we're having disagreements or there's friction. We have a bad culture. Like that probably means you could have
It's
a really
evolving.
healthy one and it could change. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, like we always do, we went from like exploring to already getting into a bit more like tangible. How do you influence? How do you shape it, create the conditions?
Yeah.
But maybe quickly back to, is it by design or by default? Kind of, we had those 3 schools of thought. I think what we share in our beliefs is that you cannot control culture or command it into existence, right?
Yeah.
But you can shape the conditions for a culture to grow trust, curiosity, connection.
Yep.
Shape the conditions for it.
Yep.
And something around like that, coherence, openness, I would summarize as the best cultures are strong enough to mean something, but open enough to evolve or keep learning.
Yep. Yeah. And I, again, don't want folks to walk away thinking like, oh, we all need to hold hands and like that's not it either. Right. There are some, I like that it has to be strong enough to stand for something, but can also evolve and create something great. And there's some cultures where hierarchy, very tightened, button up military cultures like are the best, strongest culture and work there. Right. So it's figuring out what fits for you, which I think is excellent.